Good afternoon. Welcome to another chapter of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or a self-reliant India journey taking strident steps in our country. Well, power sector is a key pillar of the Indian economy, intricately connected with the goal of the 5 trillion economy and Atmanirbhar Bharat. India has arrived at the center of the world energy stage, with our energy demand expected to increase more than that of any other country over the next 2 decades. The International Energy Agency, that's IEA, has forecast that India will overtake the European Union as the world's third largest energy consumer by 2030. An expanding economy, population, urbanization and industrializations will result in India's energy needs growing at 3 times the global average under today's policies. This is set to grow about at 35% until 2030, down from the 50% before the coronavirus pandemic. So what's the way forward? Do we follow the next wave of growth with renewable energy sources such as solar, or are we looking at hydrogen energy emission, as mentioned by the Union Minister for Finance, Nirmala Sitharaman, in a budget speech to answer to the rising demand for energy in our country? What's the way forward to the rising energy demands faced by the country? We will try and find some answers to the questions that are there in your minds over the next 60 minutes, with an expert panel of eminent guests joining us to get solutions, especially on the energy front. Well, the guests joining us this afternoon, there are 3 guests joining us. We've got Sudhindu Jyoti Sinha, advisor to Niti Aayog, joining us. We've also got Anil Razdan, former Power Secretary, and we've got A.K. Bhattacharya, senior correspondent there covering many sectors, joining us this. Well, we first got Mr. Sinha there joining us, advisor to the Niti Aayog, joining us this afternoon. So how do you look at it? India's energy demand expected to grow and expected to go fastest in the, when you look purely in terms of number crunching. How do you see this particular, International Energy IEA report?
Quite correct. The demand for energy will continue to grow.
Okay.
And the direct implications for that would be that along with that, the level of our living standards will also continue to grow.
Okay.
Our self-reliance will also grow. So the energy requirement is fabulous, the demand is there, and that needs that we need to address the entire ecosystem of energy, which starts with the source of energy, and then the generation and the transmission, distribution, and finally, of course, how to finance all these sectors together.
Okay.
The growth of energy is going to take place in a big way, leading to a self-reliant India. Yes, quite correct.
Okay. How do you see, do you see this, do you read this report by the International Energy Agency, giving a sense of direction that India is arrived at the big stage when it comes to the world? We
have arrived at a big stage. And then that also entails a lot of responsibility, in the sense that the energy sources that are there, that have to be very clean, that have to be a cutting edge of technology, and the distribution systems have to be revamped themselves. It has to be completely going for a major overhaul. So that demand for energy security by 2035, that is the goal. And of course, to have an inclusive development with universally accessible, adequate, and reliable and sustainable energy sources at rational prices. Yes, that is the primary goal.
Okay. Mr. Sinha, when you say, steps to overtaking the European Union, numbers that we are talking about purely as the world's third largest energy consumer. When we talk about these numbers, do we somewhere get a sense that India has got now a larger and a bigger role to play in the world order, especially in this new decade that we have stepped into?
We have a great role to play, not only regionally, but of course internationally.
Okay.
We do not tend to be only consumer of the energy, but we tend to have a kind of storage systems, development systems, whereby we start becoming a kind of exporter to it.
Okay.
So it does not only entail self-reliance, but also a kind of confidence that we are going to lead the world. Yes.
Okay, now when we talk about challenges there before this particular sector, especially the energy sector, do you feel that the challenges that existed, we've been able to at least overcome most of them? And are we on the right track to the equations or to the numbers that we have set for, or the targets that we have set for the year ahead 2022?
The targets that have been set, they are very aspirational targets are there. And the methodology that we are following is absolutely on the right track. But then yes, one would always say that we have got miles to go. Because with regard to the sustainability of energy, the sources that we want to have, solar is going in a big way. And we are gradually cutting down on fossil fuels. So the kind of energy systems that are there, we are going in for a smart metering. You see, the entire ecosystem, the government effort is in a positive direction. Each and every step that is there with the sole purpose that we become a kind of world leader, not only in terms of consumer, but producer also, and maybe exporter also, definitely exporter also, in the entire energy scenario.
Mm-hmm. But how would you look at it? Purely in terms of policy ambitions that we have set. What are the steps taken, especially when it comes to meeting those policy ambitions in the energy sector? And how do you see the challenges that existed and the challenges that we have overcome?
I should say that we have gone in for a kind of global benchmarking, that how exactly the systems are there all abroad, and how to incorporate them, a kind of customize them, and then bring them into our systems. That is, of course, a priority area which we have been doing. Number two, that, as I said initially, and I have always been emphasizing, that the sources of energy, we have to go beyond coal. We have to go beyond fossil fuels. So you see so much of emphasis is there on solar. And similarly, the most of the cutting edge technology is brought in with regard to solar. And if of course, beyond that, we say then advanced chemistry cell storage systems, the battery storage systems, hydrogen you mentioned in the beginning. Hydrogen is of course one of the lead areas in which it is a niche technology in which we want to immediately step into and become a kind of world leader. Yes. So I should put it this way, that the idea is twofold. Number one, the best of the technological practices with regard to energy systems, they should be brought, incorporated, customized in India. That is one. Okay. Number two, whatever will be in the future, the niche technology, we should immediately step into that so that rather than becoming a follower, we start becoming the leader of the world.
Okay. When you say, rather than becoming a follower, becoming a leader of the world, are there steps that we have taken, especially when it comes to wind energy? We did take strident steps in wind energy and, utilizing wind energy. Do you feel that something similar needs to be done, especially when it comes to hydrogen mission?
Yes, exactly. That is what the government's commitment has been. In hydrogen, for example, you see the electric vehicles are now a reality. You see that government push is there for the electric vehicles, and the kind of changes that are being brought about, not only in vehicles, but also in the storage systems. That is one area. Similarly, hydrogen fuel cells, they are kind of futuristic, little futuristic, but of course, I mean, the proof of concept is there, the demonstration is there. Best of the countries are going in that way, and we want to take a lead over there. That is why the mission has been announced, and that is why the government focuses there.
Okay, we've also got Anil Razdan, former Power Secretary, joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. First things first, how would you look at this particular IEA report, purely in terms of India's energy demand set to grow fastest in the world, number crunching that IEA has done? How would you lay it out for our, for the layman and also for our viewers, especially when it comes to these numbers that the International Energy Agency has laid out?
See, I'm not surprised at the kind of figures IEA has brought out for us, because we are an expanding population. Europe is a contracting population, virtually a stagnant economy. We're a growing economy, and our aspirational level is great. And I think it's evident that China and India are going to be the world's fastest growing economies. The US, of course, is a very large economy that we have to catch up with. The other countries which are growing fast are smaller in size of population and bandwidth. But I think, you see, we have to be very cautious at these projections, because we are still a developing country and will continue to be a developing country. Our per capita energy consumption is still very low as compared to some of the developed countries. And mind you, China does not bother about world opinion. First of all, it wants to do what it thinks is right for itself.
Okay.
It did embark on a program of massive capacity addition from coal-fired plants. It also went in for solar and wind. I've myself seen those farms more than a decade and a half back. They were very aggressive on that count. Yes, we want to raise our aspirational levels. For example, we declared ourselves to becoming a gas-based economy from 6.2% to 15% in a short span of time. Mm-hmm. But we need the infrastructure for that. China had laid out a huge gas pipeline network first. Well, we've embarked on that mission, but I think we've got to put these building blocks first. And when I was in the power ministry, I remember our goal was to escalate our capacity addition program, but through indigenous development of machinery and not import the machinery, because that is what provides you with a growth opportunity.
Okay.
We are very strong on availability of solar energy. Luckily, we're endowed with good sunlight and good sunshine. But what is our manufacturing base? I mean, I entirely agree that the future lies in renewables, in reducing emissions. But I think before we announce our leap forward plans of capacity addition, we must have the manufacturing base and then escalate on it. Luckily, today, we're not short on power. Our thermal power stations are running far below the PLF that was designed for them. Okay. And I think we have time to breathe. We should develop our capabilities, develop our manufacturing and solar, and then press the accelerator.
Okay.
Similarly for wind, we luckily have we've had a strong wind industry, but why did the wind industry start falling sick? We've got to try and see which states did not cooperate and bring out those features. Because while it is a growth opportunity, it should also see it as a huge employment opportunity. And when we talk of a hydrogen economy, yes, we need to go for EVs and batteries, but what is the outlay? Successive reports of the economic survey have shown that our expenditure on research and development has been woefully low.
Okay.
As compared to some of the other.
Well, I
think Israel, Germany, even China.
Okay.
They've grown much faster than us. And these things, you need the moolah.
Okay.
You need to put that money there. And batteries, yes, we need to go in a very big way. The developed countries and the IEA, some of the members, the older members, because they belong to the OECD group, some of them are also oil-producing countries in a large way. They're very happy if we become the world's largest oil consumers or importers in due course of time. But we have to try and see that we build our own base, we have our time. The developed countries have declared a net zero emission date targets, one after the other, getting down to about 2060, 2070. We are not yet at that stage. We're still growing, and I think we need to catch up, and equity demands that we're allowed time to catch up.
Okay. We also got Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya joining us. Bhattacharya ji, good afternoon. Welcome to Self-Reliant India. Let me start by asking you, your opening remarks with regards to, India's energy demand now set to grow the fastest in the world, very likely to overtake EU. How do you look at it? And, it looks pretty positive, but what are the drawbacks that you see when you look at these numbers?
Well, I think, as you rightly pointed out, it is a positive development. It is an indication and a kind of a global confirmation that India's energy demand will keep growing, and which is a reflection of also the economic growth potential that the economy has. As you rightly pointed out, that India will become the third largest user of energy by 2030. But it's very important to recognize the 2 points that this report is drawing our attention to. The number one point is that our growth in consumption and use of oil and coal, which are the fossil fuel and which contribute a lot to the emission, that growth will come down from the current rate of increase of 50% to 35%. Now that to my mind is a positive sign, because there's clear shift, whether you talk in terms of wind, or whether in terms of renewable energy, or the solar alliance that India is now a partner of. Now that clearly is being captured in this report, that India's growth in traditional fossil fuel that growth will come down. Therefore, it estimates that while India acquires the number 3 slot in the global pecking order in terms of the energy market, it's the share of the renewable energy that will keep rising. So, which is a positive thing. So that's number one. But the important point to be noted here is this: in spite of that, the country's dependence on oil imports will be very, very high. It is almost 90% of India's oil imports, over 90% of our oil consumption will be met through imports. Now that, to my mind, is something a cause for concern. I don't see, in terms of the per capita energy use or per capita emission, we are anywhere near the global benchmarks, in a sense that our energy use and emission norms are per capita basis. It is almost half of the global average. So I think, as India has argued in global platforms, that it is a per capita emission norm that should be the yardstick for measuring our contribution to climate change, and it is not question of what is your total emission level. It should be the yardstick should be per capita level. Having said that, the real challenge would be domestically, how do you price energy? Because it is important. Energy is an important contributor to economic growth. And if you can price it correctly and price it in a manner that it both incentivizes growth as well as disincentivizes, wasteful use and inefficient use, and does not promote to conservation, I would say that a major goal of energy growth scenarios will be lost, because it is important to grow as a market. It is important to grow as a player in the global energy market, but it is equally important to get the energy pricing right so that it incentivizes the efficient users and disincentivizes those who use them inefficiently, contributing to relatively higher emission levels. So therefore, the focus has to be on conservation. The focus has to be the right energy pricing, so that the benefits of energy economy growing at this rapid pace, which is a reflection of higher growth, is fully realized.
Mr. Sinha, looking at both my panelists, the points that they put forward. One is, how do you manufacture in India, the ancillaries that are needed for the power sector to grow, especially in wind and solar energy, and the other about incentivizing, what are the steps taken in these two points that the other panelists have raised?
I would say, as far as Mr. Bhattacharya was saying, then I will add on to what he's saying, that a lot of digital intervention is required. To have the correct practices, correct pricing for the energy, a lot of digital intervention is to be required, so that, this entire data is a kind of dynamic data. To have that access to data in the right way, in the rightly processed form before the regulators, so that the pricing can be rightly judged, and a person is asked to pay only for the electricity that he is consuming, and that is the right price. So that will be a lot of digital intervention is required. Yes. Number two, as far as the challenges with regard to renewables are concerned, I always go by what Michelangelo said years ago, that the dilemma of our generation is not that we set our targets high and miss it. Our dilemma is that we set our targets low and achieve it. I should be saying that we have set very aspirational targets, and the entire machinery of the governance is directed, is making all initiatives, efforts, so that we are able to achieve it. That is the kind of path, that trajectory that we have decided on. And in addition to that, I would say that a lot of professionalism, bringing in a lot of PPP initiatives are also going in to ensure that the financial problem is not there to take us on, and so that we are able to achieve the targets, the goals that we have set to be a kind of world leaders. Yes.
Okay, but Mr. Razdan, when you look at issues that have been addressed, when you look at overall standards, do you somewhere feel the energy stats that exist today are very much in line? India's energy stats are very much in line with global standards?
Yes, we are. In fact, you see, way back around 2000, 2001, when I was a joint secretary in the ministry, we had decided to adopt the IEA methodology of energy stats. Because we tried that time, it was very difficult to compare our energy consumption with global, because the methodology of our collection was different, particularly in the coal sector. We took a few years, but we've reached a stage when we should have probably done it a little earlier, that we are global players. We are one of the most significant economies globally, and we have to have a right assessment of where we stand. And I think this talk of digitalization, yes, I think all power consumption, all energy consumption must be metered, and there should be nothing which is not metered and sold out. If you have to give direct benefit transfer, please do it directly. The energy players are not here for charity. They've made an investment, and particularly if the private sector is expected to come, they will certainly do it for business. So I think we are, yes, in a position to be globally accessible, and I think we're in the right direction. And the point of, I would say, of energy conservation and energy efficiency that has been made by Mr. Bhattacharya is extremely significant, and that is where we started our Bachat Lamp Yojana, from the incandescent lamp to the CFL, and today to the LED. And I think that is initiatives like this, star rating programs for the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, etc. These are things which have taken 10 or 20 years to sink into the consumer's minds, but these are going to be significant things, because we have to make sure that the energy bills are affordable, people can afford the devices. And I would say the next target has to be the air conditioning, because with multi-story building and glass fascia coming in, air conditioning needs are going to increase in our country. And I think we've got to be very strict on air conditioning standards.
Mr. Bhattacharya, when you look at, especially when it comes to, PPP models that is being suggested, do you somewhere feel that there is a huge potential that still can be tapped, especially in the power sector?
Hugely. I'm glad you have raised this issue about public-private partnership, and also at a time when the government has shed its inhibitions about embracing the private sector in undertaking important initiatives in the cause of national economic development. The recent statements in the budget, as well as followed up by the Prime Minister in his statement in Parliament, clearly shows that the government is not really worried about what some people were worried about, stigmatized capital. I think the government is open about embracing the private capital and making it work towards national economic development. And I think public-private partnership is actually a very, very important instrument in that task. And energy sector is an ideal platform where the public-private partnership should be tried and should be explored. It has been tried in some ways. I think it should be experimented with in the case of power distribution, in the case of power generation, in the case of oil refining, oil production, so public-private partnerships certainly can play a big role. But there is a big requirement and a safeguard that is required. When you go in for public-private partnership, you should worry equally about the regulatory environment that prevails, because as we move more towards public-private partnership, it will be equally important to have a robust, independent regulatory regime which can oversee the rollout of the public-private partnership projects, because there should not be any lack of trust or trust in the way these public-private partnership projects are being implemented, because if there is an independent regulatory system in place, I think those concerns can be addressed. They can be consumer friendly, and yet they can incentivize efficiency and more optimal use of resource that is very scarce. So I think it is important. Public-private partnership should be encouraged, but at the same time, you must have a robust, independent regulatory regime which has the statutory protection and the statutory power to take decisions irrespective of which part of the economy you belong to, whether you are from the government or you are from the private sector. That independent regulatory system should be able to take a final, transparent, non-discretionary way of addressing issues and policies.
Okay, Mr. Razdan, I'll take your view. Then I'll come to Mr. Sinha. Mr. Razdan, how would you look at it? Is there a huge window of opportunity that exists, as Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya put it, or would you like to add something further?
I think Mr. Bhattacharya is right. There's a huge opportunity for public-private partnership, and neither the public sector nor the private sector should be made the whipping boy of any criticism.
Okay.
Both have performed and not performed, to be very objective. Public sector has stepped in when the private sector was not available or was not willing to step in. And I think if you see an example even in the automobile sector where we moved far ahead, it is the public sector, Maruti Udyog, which laid down the people's car. And I think it gave the fillip to the rest of the automobile industry to step in. And I think that is one guide. The other is, I would say, even in the power sector. It was initially the public sector companies which laid down the massive networks. But then somewhere you see, we had got lost in the Soviet model of setting up very large electricity boards, which became more like employment bureaus and became inefficient because of faulty recruitments and faulty supervision. I think energy is a business. It's an economic activity, must be paid for, must be measured, and there has to be profit. Nobody is going to stay in this business without making a profit, and should not. It should be economically viable, not exploitative. And particularly, you see, when we're talking today of expansion, yes, the state has to lay down policy. It has to lay down a policy where there is assurance, regulatory assurance, that the policies will not change for the next 5 or 10 years, because no investment will come unless there is a clarity and stability in government policy.
Okay.
And I think that is where the regulators have to step in. The regulators are not there only for fixing tariff. Particularly, I can say about the electricity sector. If there is a true regulator, the government has to step out. The regulator has to ensure the quality of service to the consumer, a remunerative price for the producer, and a system which creates a climate for healthy competition. That is, I think, the job of regulator, and not merely sit there to discuss tariffs, and that is the be-all and end-all. And the states particularly have to be held accountable. If they are not helping out in that process, particularly in the power sector, I can say so, that some of these states have been remiss on that count, and that is why the sector is suffering. So that is something. Tariffs are another issue. We cannot be subsidizing tariff by other consumers. We've got to find, if it's state policy, yes, we've got to find a way out. Because if you're going to heavily load the industrial tariff, industry is going to suffer. It's going to be non-competitive.
Okay.
So you need a very, I should say, an intelligent and a very progressive regulatory regime for as the way forward.
Okay, as a way forward. Mr. Sinha, looking at the suggestion, especially when it comes to clarity and stability in the power sector for, a PPP model to come into play, do you see the idea, that idea palpable and the idea, to be taken forward, especially in the future?
This idea is already, it is already being taken forward.
True.
See, the point is that, as Sir was saying, Mr. Rajdan was saying about the way policy has to be framed. See, the present government's initiative is very clear that any policy is created after a lot of creative inputs, a very long time of stakeholder consultation, reconciling them, and then among the line ministries it is discussed and then it is taken forward. So what I mean to say is that the policy making as of now, it is not a standalone kind of concept. It is not in isolation. So it has to be a synergized, synchronized, lot of consultative, lot of collaborative initiatives, and then it is taken forward. As far as PPP is concerned, as far as the new technology, embedding new technology into the policy is concerned, as far as emphasizing on the efficiency, number one, and initiatives, efficiency and initiatives, that of the global level. In all these, the entire policy thrust is aimed at achieving these things. That the efficiency has to be there. And the third dimension which I'll add on is the transparency. The system is, everything has to be completely transparent so that nobody could impute a motive to it. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bhattacharya, when you look at, this particular point that has been raised, especially when it comes to policy ambitions, that this government has stepped forward, especially when it comes to improving the power sector, turning around power sector, how successful or what do you see, especially when it comes to progress made in the power sector?
Well, I think if you look at the energy mix and the targets that have been set for the next few years, I see a clear preference for moving away from the dependence on the fossil fuel-led energy to a more renewable energy. And I think it's a very good, as an initiative in the right track. And this is important. But then, the goals to be achieved in this area cannot be achieved in a short time. It is not a question of 1 year or 2 years. It has to be, it's a long-term goal. And if you look at the IEA report, you realize that even though we are moving away from coal and oil, and our work on the renewable energy side is moving apace, I think our dependence on, as I said in the beginning, on imported fuel will continue to be very, very high. And I think it is important to keep this element in mind, that how do you make sure that the imported product that comes in also brings along with it some natural shocks because of price movements.
Okay.
Now, the economy must be able to be strong, and the system will have to be resilient to absorb these shocks, which is why I said at the beginning that the energy pricing is at the core of it. And if you look at the oil sector has a lot of price opacity, which needs to be looked at very closely. And oil companies, particularly in the state-owned sector, are actually hiding under that oil opacity, and there is need for greater transparency in the manner in which the oil product prices are fixed, and so that the private sector, the few private sector players who are already there, can actually face up to this public sector pricing system, which is slightly non-transparent. We do not know how those price build-ups are made and what is the basis of which. So therefore, there is need for actually lifting the veil of opacity and make sure that the pricing scenario in the energy sector, which is largely right now in the oil sector and coal is gradually, that opacity is going away because the coal pricing is coming out in the open. But I think as long as we still remain dependent largely on coal and oil, we need to attack the pricing opacity issues in the oil sector so that even our regulators can actually play a far more effective role. And of course, I agree with both Mr. Sinha and Mr. Razdan that both the regulatory robustness and the digital use are very, very important instruments in this.
Okay, digital use and robust use there were clearly the way forward. But Mr. Sinha, looking at, especially public investments, they need to be always said that they need to be strategized and channel welled. What are the steps that are taken, especially in this direction?
As far as public investment is concerned, we have got a scheme that is called PLI scheme, that is for the, it is to boost up manufacturing for solar PV, and there are other areas also. For example, in EV sector also a lot of initiative in transformative mobility, for example, initiatives. All of renewables are there, where there is a scope and there is a initiative and there is a public interest. They want to invest over there. Now, two areas probably that needs to be emphasized also is that whenever we think of energy consumption, probably our mind only goes in the maybe transport sector on one area, and on the other hand, we think of the industrial units.
Okay.
On the other hand, the rural areas also are a place where there is a tremendous need for energy security and energy self-reliance and a kind of confidence that, okay, load shedding won't be there, the feeder lines will be always having the current and they are able to draw it so that that ease of living comes. Now, if you see that the present initiatives, then in most of the rural areas, which were hitherto unconnected, away from any, I would say that any semblance of energy presence over there, that is being connected. Similarly, in say difficult Himalayan regions, northeastern regions, hitherto difficult areas, coastal and other areas, island areas, there also the presence of energy is significant, and that is transforming the entire way of living. The ease of living is coming, and that is leading to a kind of transformational change in all walks of life. So I should put it this way, that the government thrust is already clear.
Okay.
As far as, because as I said, that it is not only the energy security that we aspire for, we also want that it has to be an inclusive development has to be there. So that is the reason why at the fag end we are attempting to connect so that current is there, power is there, and that brings about change. That is one area. Number two, public is also, public finance, private finance is also, they are also interested in pumping in their money. And yes, it was rightly said earlier that trust has to be fundamental to it. And along with that, then only it follows that, okay, risk sharing has to be done. That is what is fundamental to the PPP models. And different PPP models are being framed so that the public finance, they develop a kind of trust so that they are ready to invest into energy sector, not only the conventional sectors, but also in the niche areas, in the renewables, in those areas that will lead to import substitution, self-reliance, and energy security, as we have laid our goals at.
Now first coming to Mr. Razdan. Razdan, looking at 2020 December 12th, we have crossed that halfway mark when it comes to that Paris Accord. Now purely looking at the things in the next half, how would you see it? Would you see that it's time for local national actions that need to be more in place to meet those global ambitions that have been set in the Paris Accord?
Well, I think, you see, the Paris Accord had set a global target, and luckily India is one of those countries, or probably the only major country which is meeting its targets. That is something very creditable. But at the bottom of it is still that our per capita energy consumption is still one of the lowest. We need energy, we need a lot of energy. Yes, we need clean energy. But this will bring me to another niche point, which I would just like to flag here, that I think that capital is very expensive in India when you see globally available capital cost. And we, of course, we cannot afford to give that kind of very cheap capital, but we have to prioritize. I think when we began serving the government, there used to be priority lending areas. And that time, of course, it was mostly in the rural areas or some schemes like that. But I think we need to prioritize 4 or 5 global issues, which are very crucial to us also. One is, you see, creation of employment. The other is clean energy. And the third would be clean employment, clean air.
Okay.
These are, I think, are areas, 3 or 4 areas, which I think we need to flag, and particularly R&D also. I would add another one. And that is where we have to set out and give much cheaper credit for more and more industry to come in here indigenously. That is, I think, that I would like to flag. The other issue before we leave, I think Mr. Bhattacharya talked of transparency. Well, I've seen the working of both the private and the public sector, and I would say that the public sector is much more transparent than the private sector. Yes, oil pricing is there, but yes, oil and coal are contributing a very large share of our revenues, though we might call them sin fuels. But yes, they're the backbone of a lot of tax collection. They're paying up a lot of taxes. And as far as the coal sector is concerned, I think it's almost been 12 or 13 years since we floated a cabinet note for a coal regulator. The regulator is still not in place. And I think a progressive government like the present one should immediately install a coal regulator, particularly when we've opened up mining finally and given up our very unjustified reservations on whom to allow and how to allow private sector to enter. It's an open field for everybody and should be transparent.
Okay, now, Mr. Bhattacharya, how would you look at it, especially when you look at the Paris, climate accord that we've got into now, looking at, the energy sector? Do you feel we are very much on track, especially when it comes to meeting those global targets?
Well, in response to your precise question on whether we are on track on meeting those global targets, I would say that a lot of effort will have to be undertaken. But it is important to recognize what has happened in the world in the last few months. We have seen, we are going to see the return of the United States into the Paris Accord, and therefore we have to contend with the new forces that will certainly be at play. Earlier, if you could have afforded to see this entire movement losing a bit of its momentum or steam, but now we can actually be absolutely rest assured that with the return of the US into this fold, I would see that a lot of action are going to be will be on the anvil. So therefore, we need to be prepared in taking on this task of making sure that our developmental aspirations do not get compromised because of the climate change goals that the world will like to impose on a country like India. Okay. While it is true that at a country level, we will become a kind of one of the major emitters, but I think we should go back to an earlier position of how our per capita emission norms should be the yardstick for judging our performance on this front. So I think the coming back of the US will be an important event, and once the US comes, India as diplomacy, climate diplomacy, will have to show its impact, its effect on what really happens on the global front. So therefore, I am looking forward to what kind of relationships, what kind of understanding that we can actually work with the US, because that will once again become a very important player, and we have to take US on our side if we want to achieve those goals without compromising our genuine, legitimate developmental aspirations, because you cannot penalize a developing economy just because the developed economies have grown at a rapid pace and being a big emitters. But now that they have reached that level of development, you can penalize a developing economy. So that kind of understanding is very important, and it will be good to have a country like the US to be on India's side, and the climate change goals must be viewed, and India's climate change goals must be viewed from that perspective. While it is important that the global environment damages are contained, but at the same time, India's legitimate aspirations of economic growth, raising the people of India to a higher per capita income level are equally important. So therefore, there has to be a kind of a balancing act and a kind of a compromise deal by which India can both attain its domestic economic growth goals as well as the international requirements of climate damage mitigation.
Mr. Sinha, when you look at energy, environment, sustainable development, how do you see this integrated policy working, and what are the advantages that India has reaped because of this?
The entire approach is integrated. I should be saying that. And as far as, in fact, I will take on from the cue from the earlier answer. In all the three nationally determined commitments that we have made at Paris, in all three of them, we are moving on very fast, very forward.
Okay.
Without, of course, the development requirement that we have, that is with us, that is there. Now, one point that was always there, in this synergy initiative that you have mentioned, that was the R&D initiative, research and development. In the recent budget that has been announced also, R&D is a major focus areas. As far as energy precisely is concerned, the power precisely is concerned, which we are discussing today, let me tell you, other than CSIR labs, majority of the IITs, to be telling you precisely, 7 of them in a big way, they are working on these aspects of energy. How to go about developing niche technology, what steps to take so that those with whom proof of concept is available, they can be taken forward at a demonstration stage, and with those which are already in demonstration stage, well, they can be rolled out. That is the kind of initiative. As late as, say, December, IIT Kanpur has already set up a new department, completely dedicated department. They call it Department of Sustainable Energy Engineering, in which there is an absolutely significant focus on transformational energy systems, mobility, and battery storage. Okay. So that is the kind of, the entire initiative is there. So I should be saying that it's absolutely positive. Initiatives are on the right direction. All the line ministries, they are working day in and day out to achieve it. Niti Aayog is giving its own push and the creative inputs so that we are able to achieve it. And that is the way this synergy which you mentioned, all the three factors, sustainability, development, and energy requirement, that is being maintained. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Razdan, when you look at, R&D being such a huge factor that comes into play, especially in the power sector, what could be the suggestion that you would keep, especially when it comes to getting knowledgeable partners on board, both in terms of technologies and also in terms of systems?
Yes, I think, you have to attain the cutting edge of technology, so to say, and be very watchful of that. I'm very conscious and appreciative of the recent moves, particularly in battery development and alternatives to lithium, which are taking place in our IITs. I think we've got to be careful to move this kind of agenda also in our other universities and courses, which are largely theoretical. And that is, I think, that is the
Well, I believe we've lost our audio with Mr. Razdan. Well, if I could put that same question to Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, how would you look at it, especially when it comes to research and development, that's got huge cost inputs, how would you, purely in terms of technologies and systems, how does a country like India approach that particular point when it comes to R&D?
I think on the question of R&D, I would say that there is need for the existing approach has taken us up to a point which is laudable. But I think we need to look at the entire exercise, I would say, afresh, because I think you have to see what has been the R&D expenditure as a percent of GDP in the country. Overall R&D expenditure is not a very, very poor number. But I think the problem arises is that our R&D expenditure and linked to the private sector is very poor. So therefore, my sense is that we need to build greater synergies between the universities, private universities, the government universities, the UGC universities with the private sector, so that the benefits of R&D actually percolate down much faster and more efficiently and more effectively. Because right now what is happening is a lot of the R&D exercises that are happening are in the government labs, government institutions, and their transmission for their utilization in the private sector, which affecting people, large number of people, is fairly limited. So I think time has come to look at this question, the challenge of the R&D being extended to the university system, and the university system to have direct collaborative efforts with the private sector industry, like it happens in the US, where the private sector industries have a direct collaborative effort and research initiatives with the universities in the US, and that really gives rise to new efforts, new benefits to the system, to the people, to the economy. I think there is a lot of merit in replicating that system in a larger way. While it is true that the government must take the initiative role, the initiative and the initial role in triggering R&D expenditure, but I think this has to be expanded and bring the private sector and the university system closer, so that the R&D benefits actually lead to greater benefits for the economy as a whole.
Mr. Sinha, we've been hearing about renewable energy, DISCOM, solar energy, all buzzwords, especially when it comes to the power sector. But the finance minister in a budget speech, did make a mention about a lesser known technology known as that green hydrogen fuel, in this budget speech. Could you, throw some more light on this particular aspect on the green hydrogen fuel that we're looking at, especially in terms of, both in terms of growth potential and purely in terms of, especially in terms of meeting our energy needs?
Green hydrogen is a cutting-edge technology, and the source of its generation is primarily solar light. It is water, and with very little use of those elements or metals which are already available in the country. So that import dependence completely goes off if we switch over to the green hydrogen. That is number one. Number two, green hydrogen, its implication is not only for the mobility sector, it has got a wide ramifications for all sectors, precisely industry. For example, fertilizer can be one area where green hydrogen can be used. And green hydrogen is one area where we must enter into, take it in a big way, and we then become a kind of leader, global leader in this area. As we were mentioning about R&D, I'll just because we will be closing down, so I'll just say one thing, that R&D is not only these days, it is not only theoretical or fundamental alone. Now it is based on the problem statements that are being faced by the industry, by the sector. So it is a problem area, statements are carved out of that, research areas are identified, people and those who are interested to go ahead on it, they are identified with the help of the grand challenge method. Industry and academic collaboration is established, and then it is being taken forward. So that within a time frame, in a mission mode, the complete end-to-end solution comes, and then that is what strengthens this entire R&D ecosystem. It is not only based on, not alone based on fundamental area. Of course, I mean, emphasis will continue to be so that we take a leapfrog for the future. But even the existing problems, they have to be solved through R&D initiatives in a mission mode within the fixed time frame, based on the correct and the problems, right problems that are being faced by the industry with the collaboration. That is the kind of initiative which is there.
Well, Mr. Bhattacharya, I'll expect you to keep it brief. Purely looking at a solution when you're looking at the power sector, do you somewhere feel that there needs to be more increased financing facilities that are available, especially in the energy sector?
Well, I think, the finance is a function of incentives. I don't think, we are short of resources in this area.
Okay.
What we are probably short of is to create the necessary incentives by which, and when I say incentives, I mean transparent fare structure, no cross-subsidization, or maybe reduce the cross-subsidization. So if you have the proper incentive system, I don't think financing will be an issue in this country.
Well, a real paucity of time there, we could have discussed this particular issue a bit longer. There, hydrogen, especially green hydrogen fuel, that needed more deliberations. Maybe we leave it for some other time. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in the studio. It's a pleasure having you here, both of you who took time out to join us in this particular program. Remember, power sector is a key pillar of the Indian economy, intricately connected with that goal of a 5 trillion economy and Atmanirbhar Bharat or Self-Reliant India. Last year, December 12, 2020, marked half a decade of the Paris Agreement, whose key ambition was to cap that increase of the global average temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius. A global coalition that undertakes strong coordinated action towards not only reduction of emissions and adoption of cleaner technologies, but towards net zero will be our best hope. So let's leave it there. Let's all hope and let's all pray that we keep reducing our carbon footprints and we make it a better place, not only for us to live, but also for the future generation. Thanks for watching. News continues here on DD India. Stay tuned.